The world is changing and all forms of relations are changing, be it family, be it romantic relationship, be it business. Everything is changing as we know it. And a few days ago, I had a conversation with myself. I said, if I had a daughter and I wanted to safeguard her relationship journey, what would I say to her? And so this is why I decided to come up with 5 episode crash course for what would I say to my daughter. And this here is episode 3 of those 5 episodes. The first lesson that I will try to establish is to make her understand that every family has some form of inheritance. You see, having a child with someone doesn't just come, it's not just an issue of pleasure, it's not just an issue of having a kid, it's not just an issue of, taking selfies and having this cute little thing that is here. There is some spiritual significance to you now deciding that I will give my seed or my womb to this particular person. Personally, I believe that every family has some form of inheritance. So when you come together and decide to create a vessel, and this vessel will host both of you. In other words, what happens is there is a form of inheritance that is in your family. There is a form of inheritance that this particular person's family has. And this particular family, let's take for example, this you might not even be aware that there is some form of inheritance that this person holds. And because some of these things are very spiritual. So in episode 2, we would have dealt with what those things are, or the men that you must consider before you get to where now you are. Right? Now, let's say maybe in this person's family, their inheritance is witchcraft. And in your family, your inheritance is peace. Or in your family, your inheritance is wealth. In your family, your inheritance can be drunkenness. In your family, your inheritance could be marriages breaking up or people dying at a certain age. These are inheritances, right? There are both good and evil inheritance in all families. These are things that are given over families because of the vows or covenants that elders of those families made, because we are our blood. That is why even when we now do DNA, in order for us to lay a claim, both vessels that were present in consummation must be there in order for us to come up with a claim. So even in spiritual sense, it means that when you decide to lie with someone and have a child, that means that you have opened a door, and this particular person has also opened the door. That means spirits or doors from both sides of the family can lay a claim over the child. We know of certain traditions that in certain families, that even when a man wants to do a DNA or wants to verify if the child is theirs, they take the child. There is a crow, right? There is a crow where family members or elders have been buried. So they put the child there. If the cows move away, it means that this here is not your child, because the spirit or the door that has been opened in the child that is being presented to those spirits and to those elders is not the door that it's a door that is not recognized. So the cows or whatever, they will move away. And so by that they know, this is not your child. This is not my son. This is not my daughter. So what then happens is, spiritually, if you decide to lay with someone, you have opened the door and they have opened the door. That is why now, later on, when you see certain patterns of the family or certain patterns in your child, it means that you must be able to trace and to question your lineage and to question the person's that you have slept with. In Proverbs 13:22, the Bible makes us understand that an inheritance is laid for children's children. It means that whatever that you decide to do, whoever you decide to sleep with and have a child, it means that you have now given them an inheritance. You have procured an inheritance for them. By you engaging in that sexual intercourse, you were procuring an inheritance. And now you have given it to your child. And your child will give it to their child. Now there is an issue with this form of inheritance. It could be good, it could be bad. When you now go back to Genesis, the story of Abraham, Sarai, and Hagar, you understand that Sarah says to Abraham, go into this servant and have a child with. And Abraham does that. And Ishmael is born. This is not a child of a promise, because God later on comes into the picture and say, I will give you a child. Who is the child of a promise? A child of a promise is the one whom full inheritance and the blessing of the family must rest upon. That is the child of the promise to me. But if you decide to neglect the principles of God and decide to go astray and lay with a foreign man outside the promise or outside the boundaries of the promise of God, you will bear an Ishmael. And now listen to what the Bible says concerning Ishmael. This is in Genesis 16. Has to be 11. Yes, 16:11. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, behold, thou art with child. This now he's saying this to Hagar. And shall bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man. This is now explaining the nature and the character of the child that you will have outside the promise. He says he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So a child that is born outside promise is a child that inherits violence. He is at war with everyone, all his brethren, all his brothers. His spirit is not that of peace or calmness. That is why it is very important to consider who you give. And so in a nutshell, it is very important to consider who you give your seed to. And please understand that even though this is not the child of a promise, it does not necessarily mean that God forsakes them or God despises them or God forgets about them. That is not what the scriptures puts in front of us. It means that the full blessing that was supposed to be upon the son or the child of a promise is now divided. Because to Ishmael, God promises a great nation. He promises 12 princes out of him. Even though this is the issue that you find yourself in, it does not necessarily mean that this is a child who is hated. It simply means for any decision that you make, there are always consequences, right? For any decision that you make, there are always consequences. But it does not necessarily mean that God has forsaken you and God has forsaken this particular person. It just means that there is a lot of work to be done in this particular person's life. In order for them to have their forward movement, there are things that they need to do, there are doors they need to close, there are walls they need to build or break. So that is what that is all about. Because even to Ishmael, God promises 12 princes out of him. God promises 12 princes, and he promises him to be a great nation. So it does not necessarily mean that God will depart from your child if at all he's not the child of the promise. It simply means that the full blessing is now divided. And so at this point, if you ask me, are you supposed to lay with anyone and give yourself or your seed to just anyone for a moment of pleasure? My answer is you need to consider, because there are spiritual consequence to it all. The blessing is divided. The child that is born of a wild spirit, wild character, violence. And in order for you to correct that, it takes a lot of priesthood for you to be able to break and to correct those certain measures. So many of us wonder, why is it that I'm speaking but my children cannot listen? It is because there is a door that was opened. And you need to understand, when princes of that family come into the picture, and this is very, very important, when princes of that particular family come into the picture, they have a claim over that child. They have a spiritual claim over that particular individual, because two bloods are speaking in that particular individual. So you might say, I'm a single mother, I'm a single parent, I can do this. You can in the natural. But the truth of the matter is, two spirits are beckoning for this. It reminds me of the devil contending for the body of Moses. The Bible says Michael dared not to engage with him, but said, the Lord rebuke you. So there is some form of spiritual priesthood that is necessary to ensure that even though you claim to be a single mother, the truth of the matter is you are not. There are spirits that are putting a claim over this child because of the door that you have opened. But that's it for me from today. Let us meet on the next episode. I believe that we will now look into, if all this is an issue, what type of men must I consider? Or should we now start in the beginning and say, what really are relationships all about?